Finally, some good news. Good news coming from the Irish government today. It's been a rough old week, a rough old weekend, a lot of violence, a lot of stabbing, a lot of name calling, a lot of skullduggery going on. But finally, an announcement has been made, a proclamation, if you will, from none other than Micheál Martin concerning the cost of living crisis that, let's face it, unless you've been living under a rock, you have been feeling the pinch of it. A comment today in the Irish Independent: the end of the cost of living crisis is welcome, but we cannot become complacent. And there's the Taoiseach himself, Micheál Martin, with a nice pinky fuchsia type background. Very fitting for him, I would think, in a slightly awkward pose and a funny hand gesture, telling us that the cost of living crisis is over. Well, if Micheál Martin says it, then it must be true. And it's nice to be able to make a proclamation like that, especially when you're on the kind of money that Micheál is on and the rest of his cabinet. The expenses, the perks, who knows what income streams those guys and girls have coming in. But for the average person, the average man or woman on the street, is the cost of living crisis over? The crisis, or the spike that followed the COVID-19 pandemic, is finished. 5 years later, they're telling us it's finished, at least. That is Micheál Martin's view. Anyway, the Taoiseach says there are no plans to continue energy credits or introduce a new cost of living package in the next budget. Now, that's fair enough. If there genuinely is a cessation of the cost of living crisis, well, then you would think that the prices of everything has come down and nobody needs support anymore. Everybody's making loads of money and has lots of cash flowing around that they can spend to boost the economy, keep the lights on, put food in the fridge. You would think that. There are no plans to continue energy credits or introduce a new cost of living package in the next budget. Energy credits were introduced last year's budget in October as part of the government's response to inflation and the cost of living challenges. In other words, giving people money to help them keep the lights on and put food on the table. It was announced that all domestic electricity customers, this is last year, would get €250 off their electricity bills through 2 instalments. Similar measures had been announced in previous budgets. So effectively, people have become accustomed to these credits. And let's face it, €250 knocked off your electric bill. Who's going to complain about that? However, Martin has ruled out continuing the measure by saying another cost of living package would not be part of the next budget. So it has been declared by Micheál, no more subsidies, no more energy credits. They're not going ahead with it anymore. Previous budgets included one-off additional payments for those receiving a range of other allowances, such as child benefit, disability allowance and fuel allowance. There were also tax measures, including the renter's tax credit. Now, look at this. Very interestingly, Martin did not specify whether these measures would be affected. Now, he either doesn't know that, or he does know that, and he's not telling us that, because if they weren't affected, he would be shouting it from the rooftops. He would be telling us that there's only 2 measures affected, but these other range of benefits are set to go ahead. But silence speaks louder than words sometimes, and Micheál is being tight-lipped and tight-fisted, possibly, about that. Another article is running on this one here today. No cost of living measures or energy credits in the next budget. Now, this is to supplement that last story. This is to give a picture of where consumers are with regards to their electricity and gas supplies. More than 400,000 electricity and gas users are currently in arrears with their suppliers. That's a lot of people. That's 500,000 users are in arrears with their suppliers. Now, if there was no cost of living crisis or it had subsided, I don't know, maybe that's a high figure. Nearly 500,000 people that are in arrears with their energy suppliers, if they've got money to burn, if they're flush at the minute, and if things are on the up, you wouldn't think that that would be the case, but it most definitely is the case. It goes on to talk about the €250 for electricity bills. And here we go. The government has landed in a spot of bother over its pre-election predictions on the number of houses to be completed last year. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's forecast of 40k was dramatically undershot, leaving a credibility gap. It left more than a credibility gap. It's left a home gap, a house gap, that people can't get a roof over their head. They're having to queue up, hundreds of people, to buy 2 and 3 bedroom terraced houses in Kildare at 400 to 500,000 euro each, sleeping in their cars overnight, and hundreds of people being turned away because there simply aren't enough homes. That's just one instance. Same with rental prices. The price of rent is going through the roof because there's a lack of available rental properties. And the people that are getting them are those that have plenty of cash, are in very well-paid jobs, but the people that aren't are the ones that are suffering. So, a credibility gap? Yeah, there's a credibility gap with the Irish government. And to be honest, how these people are allowed to remain in situ in their positions after literally lying and cooking the figures for last year is beyond me. Talking about 40,000 houses predicted, they delivered 30,000. And they're not on track to deliver anything remotely close to what is needed this year, next year, or the year after that. Talks about inflation figures being more reliable as they're retrospective. The Consumer Price Index, of Ireland's official measure of inflation, is defined for the previous months by the Central Statistics Office. And again, this is all set up to make it very, very difficult for people to actually keep track of what the official figures are. And if you're listening to this and you're like me, the way I gauge inflation, or the way I gauge the cost of living, is when I go to a shop, or I go to buy groceries, or I go to put fuel in my car, or pay the electric bill, or whatever. Is the price going up or is it coming down? And for me anyway, nothing really is getting any cheaper. The price of a shop is going up. Electricity prices are up. Fuel prices are still very high. Insurance premiums are going through the roof. Everything's getting more expensive. The cost of eating out is getting more expensive if you're fortunate enough to do it. It's not something I partake in much. But the cost of everything is creeping up. Inflation dropped steadily over 2024 from a half 4.1% in January to 0.7% in September and October. Again, those are just figures. They can move decimal points around. What does it translate to in your shopping basket? And then we had the shenanigans with ESB following Storm Éowyn. This comes as they confirmed the cost of network repairs will not be factored into electricity prices in 2025. Yeah, and rightly so. Those poles that are hanging, flopping around in the breeze that got blown over were rotten in many cases. The trees and the shrubs around these poles were overgrown and helped to contribute to this. And ESB's making a fortune, hundreds of millions of euro profit every single year. The government are tied in with it as well. So there was a bit of a hullabaloo last week as Taoiseach Simon Harris had called previous suggestions by the ESB chief Paddy Hayes that customers would pay for damage caused by Storm Éowyn extraordinarily insensitive. Who's Harris to talk about being extraordinarily insensitive? But he has a point here with Harris. In other words, he told Harris to wind his neck in. He tugged on his leash and pulled him back in again. The audacity of that company threatening to pass on the cost of repairs to their punters, to their customers, when they're hundreds and hundreds of millions in profit year after year after year. He has said that damage done by the storm to the electricity network would be significant and the cost would run into tens of millions of euro. Well, even if it did, that's still a drop in the bucket. A drop in the bucket for ESB's profits. But here we have Paddy thinks that the Irish consumer should pay the price. At least that's what he threw out there to begin with. But he was branded insensitive by the scarecrow himself, by Simon Harris. So he was told that the costs will find their way back into the network, and he was told, well, that's not going to happen in 2025. Be under no illusion. I would think, I'm just hypothesizing here, knowing large multinational corporations and government-backed organizations, they don't do anything for free. They don't give you anything for your benefit. So somewhere, somehow, maybe those costs will be factored in this small print. He has also said that the public service obligation levy would still be charged to customers who were without power, as it funds investment in the network. Deary me. Harris urged a more sensitive approach, a slightly more sensitive approach, not a much more sensitive approach, a slightly more sensitive approach. So the comments from the Taoiseach come as more than 400,000 domestic energy and gas accounts are behind in payments. There are now fears the arrears could rise whenever they cut the electricity and the gas credits. They will rise. If you're cutting those gas credits and there's already 400,000 people in arrears, they're not going to get any better. I mean, it doesn't take a genius or a rocket scientist to work that one out. So around 275,500 residential electricity customers were behind on their payments in the 3 months to November. Obviously, the new quarter's figures are about to come out. Another 164,000 domestic gas customers owe money to their supplier. This represents about 1 in 4 gas accounts. So a quarter of the people in Ireland that are currently consuming gas, a quarter are behind on their payments, and they're cutting the energy credit in the next budget. It won't be there. It won't be there. And why will it not be there? It won't be there because Micheál said the cost of living crisis is over. Micheál and his big salary, with his big expense account, who knows what else he's got flooding into the Martin coffers. He doesn't have to worry about ESB increases in energy prices. He doesn't have to worry about the price of a loaf of bread. He doesn't have to worry about his car insurance premiums going up. He's minted. He's on the pig's back. But what about you, listener? Would you agree that these costs can just be written off, that we don't need any more help or subsidies? What do you think about that? Leave me your thoughts and opinions below. Is Martin talking out of his backside as usual, or has he had a moment of clarity and he's starting to make sense and resonate with the Irish electorate? Leave me your thoughts, comments and opinions below. And for now, this is me, Rick Munn, No Risk, No Reward Media, over and out.